Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Washington, D.C. As Philip said, I'm Tom Costabile. I'm recently joined ASME after retiring a few times. I just couldn't figure out what to do with all that time on my hands. And before we start, I want to say thank you for what you do every day. It makes a big difference. For us, as an engineer, as Philip said, I practiced engineering for a few years and I went into a whole bunch of different arenas. I'll tell you a quick story about Napster because that's something that, as we go through with the open access, been down that path, played in the movies, did all the part that you wanted to believe. I was working for Sony Corporation at the time, Sony Music, and I met a gentleman by the name of Ron Conway. Ron Conway was one of the senior partners at Kleiner Perkins, and his nephew was a gentleman, or a young man at the time, called Sean Fanning. So Ron says to me, Ron's a big tennis fan, I'm going to be in New York for the event. Would you go to the one of the prelims with Sean and I want you to meet my nephew. So he starts talking to me about Napster, and we were reading about it in the news. This is 1995. And he says to me, I just hate the music company. I want to be able to do whatever I want with music. Okay. So we go down a path with he and his uncle, who's, when you shake Ron's hand, you have to count your fingers because he is in the private equity business and what have you. 1996, I went to a board meeting in Tokyo. I said, we can buy Napster for $8 million, crush the concept, and the world will be a better place. So the board the Sony board at the time, did not feel that was worth it. We talked with our partners. There were 7 major record companies at the time and 12 video companies or movie companies. Nobody believed that Napster would take over. Well, short 2 years later, the industry went from $42 billion to $21 billion. And nothing changed except that you were able to click a mouse and share intellectual property that was created by some very, very creative people with several million of your closest friends. So I jump forward a few years, I join ASME, I meet Philip, we start talking about different arrangements with our divisions and what have you, and I keep hearing about open access, and I'm saying this is Napster 2.0. So we have to have a plan, and it's one that, and in a controlled environment, I fully believe in the concept, but how do we replace that and how do we transition? So if you look at the music and video industry today, it's come a long way. I will tell you, I encourage you to keep downloading those songs because it's paying my pension, but I'd appreciate all that. So, but today I thought we'd take a little bit of a different approach and talk about the next generation. Part of what I've experienced at ASME is that I walk into a meeting or one of our divisional conferences, and I'm the millennial in the room, which is pretty difficult for me because I'm fairly old. I can just about barely make it up these steps here, but so it's one of how do we attract new talent and what are they looking for? So when I look at today's engineering group, and as Philip said, I started practicing engineering way back in the early 70s. How do they differ from the professionals of yesteryears? Engineering today, in my opinion, has become more interdisciplinary. It's a rapidly evolving mix of global players and technologies. So I look at robotics. Is robotics, when you design a robot, is it a mechanical engineer? Is it an electrical engineer? Is it a computer scientist? And what standards do you use? What reference material do you use? It's quite a bit different than what I was used to. So when you look in the changing workplace and you step into a young engineer, whether it's a millennial or a Gen Zer, forget the Gen Xers, they've grown up in a different interconnected world. Some of the criteria that we were looking at when I was running private equity was that if you were a gamer, you were much, much more suited to our way of life. And then when you look at some of the robotics, at ASME, we've got a couple of codes that we now inspect high tower cranes with drones. So we've got a team of engineers writing the standards on how often do you stop the drone? What resolution do you use the camera? What lighting do you use on the camera? What's the frequency of inspection? So the simple mechanical, old-style stuff is great, but then when it comes to operating the drone, who are the best individuals to operate that? Guys and gals that play games a lot because their fingers move a lot quicker. And their mind and their ability to see things behind the scenes in a video game apply to what's happening in our inspections today. So we also found that today up-and-coming engineers are very different in skill sets and learning aptitudes. So Where we thought that a classroom environment or an environment like this is going to generate ideas, it doesn't work anymore. A lot of the free open space, and I kid around all the time because at our conferences with students, if you use the 2 F words, you get a lot better attendance, and that would be free food. So engineers are truly lifelong learners. I know that because I learn something every day. The last 2 days we were here, ASME was here, we had our board meeting at the hotel down the block from here on Monday, and Monday night we hosted a whole group at the Capitol, a private tour at the Capitol, and it was interesting to hear some of the younger Eclipse interns that we had with us in terms of their life learning experience. All of them were intrigued about the building, about the concept, but nobody really understood why we would do it this way. Why we would do it this way. And it's been done that way for years. So, of course, capitalizing on that, I've had quite a few interesting conversations. So, knowledge is the cornerstone of engineers, and it's really that cornerstone that gives us the ability to solve problems. This is true for, I don't care about what generation you are, what age you are, it's that scientist that comes out in each of us, how do I solve a problem? And really, if you look at the statistics here, I'll show you my Brooklyn accent in reading them. It's pretty interesting about what we've been able to capture. So, favorite, old school versus new school. There's a lot of tension that comes out of the difference between old school and new school. A lot of our standard development work, a lot of our publishing work, there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge in there. So transferring to just a digital platform today. We're hiring more digital marketing people at ASME because we have to market our lifelong standards. Very much like your organization, ASME was founded, its first meeting was February 7th, 1880. There are days, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I feel that I attended that meeting. But it's a lifelong journey, and the younger generation values mastering skills and really that digital engineer. So we're trying to develop that digital engineer. And as part of your conference today and tomorrow, that's something I'd like just to keep rolling in the back of your mind. What does a digital engineer, what does a digital publisher do? It's completely different from what we've all done. So, is engineering a profession? We don't think so. We do know that engineers of all ages are passionate about learning, and they truly take it very personal. I believe the number one reason they seek more engineering and related knowledge is to build their own personal expertise. I see that more and more with the group that's coming out of college today. Years ago in the 80s, it was the book of business. Mostly our sales teams were worried about who owned the customer, who owned that particular book of business. Could I take that from one to the other, one company to the other? There's no loyalty to that anymore today. What's the loyalty is to themselves. So a lot of what we've been doing is building, giving them tools to build their database, build their own environment that allows them to continue to grow. And as they grow, they completely support the mission of what we're attempting to do. Our findings also show that they feel that engineering is more than a job. It's just as I said, and the way I like, the conversation I've had and the expression I keep hearing is that it's a way of being in the world. I quote Abraham Lincoln quite often lately, and my favorite quote from him is, if you want to predict the future, create it today. And it's what we're trying to do. So increasing knowledge. Some interesting statistics here. Build their careers, 83% versus 59%. Seen as an innovator. It's the difference between the age gap that's there. And if you think about it in terms of just our learning and what have you, I asked a question at a meeting at NYU Langone a couple of weeks ago with 50-some students. Does everybody know what a slide rule is? So we got a few hands up. I said, does anybody know what a log table is? And it's not the piece that your parents have in their dining room. So it was interesting to watch that. And then during the conversation, I was talking about a subject that we'll do today. Rich Laudnot, who's our past president, is here, or president-elect, I should say. Sorry, Rich, is here with us today. He and I are testifying, or we're presenting up in Congress at noon today on digital printing of stem cells. Dean Kamen, somebody, you might remember him. Dean is the gentleman who created the concept of Segway and sold the patent to somebody else to commercialize it. So his concept is if you need a heart, we'll digitally print you a new heart. If you need a pancreas, we'll digitally print the pancreas. So he has, the first thing they printed was a human ear. And they grafted the human ear to a rat to see how it's growing. The ear and the rat looks a little strange, but they're both doing fine. And we'll talk today a little bit about how do we further this concept. So in my talk at NYU, all of a sudden somebody's in the back room and they're passing phones around. They're actually fact-checking what I'm saying and passing it around back and forth in terms of their knowledge base. The other part that they like too is that Dean has successfully used a 6-axis robot to print stem cells on a patch on the pig's heart. And again, the pig is doing fine, and everybody's happy about it. So an eerie concept that we're gaining a lot of momentum and a lot of ways to do it. But again, as an innovator, or am I building my career? We'll leave you guys to think about that. So it wouldn't be possible as an engineer if I didn't show some numbers and some slides that don't make sense. I went to our CFO and asked, how can I do this? As you know, for those of you that look at financial records, this doesn't even come close because you could read some of these numbers. If it was a true financial slide, you wouldn't be able to see it. But, you know, young engineers truly seek out resources in the form that they use best. As an employer, we need to pay attention to and offer those opportunities for them to be able to gather this information. While all groups seek training, students and early career engineers do more of that. So when I look at the 30 to 40-year-old group, they're very active in seeking training, but the group that comes out of college or out of grad school up until that 30, 35-year mark, they're out there, anything I can do to go get some additional training, some additional information. And what we're seeing, what I'm seeing personally, is that that information comes back and it really truly meets the mission and vision of the entity. By the way, Philip has a copy of this slide, this presentation. So if any of you want a copy, you can give it to you. I want to show a video in a few minutes, so it's quite large. The video is part, so we'll strip that out. But the slides for this, if you're interested in, we'll provide them later on. So the other part that I want to talk about is some additional opportunities. Does anybody do podcasting here? Does anybody do videos? I come out of a world where that was a way of life. So we've done about 20 different podcasts so far at ASME. We have another 50 scheduled for later this year. We're starting to think about videos. How do we do 2-minute videos? Anybody that, I'm sure all of you do this, that the other day I came home, my wife was saying that the stove wasn't working correctly. It's only 2 years old, so what I did was I went on YouTube first off and looked at the video on how to fix it. I ordered the part on Amazon, and it cost me a grand total of about $15 to put the whole piece together, and I was a hero. I haven't used the stove since then because I've been traveling, but the YouTube video was successful. So when you look at learning and what do young engineers do, it's those types of different features that none of us would traditionally look towards. I sound like an infomercial here now, but the other part that works is the multitude of websites that have come up just gathering data from engineers and from groups that are technicians that really make our world a lot easier to live through. And the other part that I would say is staying engaged. This is the part that we haven't figured out yet. So when I look at the life cycle, my son is a mechanical engineer. He's been out of school now about 16 years. He's worked for 5 different companies. The reason he's changed jobs so much is that he does a lot of research. His specialty is miniaturization of items. So when you look at the brand loyalty as opposed to me when I spent a 20-some-year career with Sony Corporation, it's unheard of today. And a lot of it is how do we keep this young, energetic group engaged? I think that's a lot of what you all do every day in terms of research, in terms of the publications, in terms of how do I get that information, and how relevant is it? If, unlike in the early days when we were sitting there writing specifications and we would research and spend weeks upon putting the best facts and the best figures together. Today I want to be able to download it, cut and paste, and boom, I'm done, and I'm on my way. I can create the next special item. Having those tools in place keeps the individuals, in our opinion, engaged, and the engagement there leads to our mission and our ability to continue to produce standards. So with that, I'd share with you just quickly ASME's mission. And it's very simple. Serve diverse global communities by advancing and disseminating and applying engineering knowledge for truly improving the quality of life and all that safety globally. And really the part that I emphasize every day is let's have fun when we do it. What's the excitement in engineering? Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, you're an engineer, there is no excitement on it. Well, you watch a boiler blow up. It's pretty exciting, let me tell you. So how do you prevent that part of it? Or you watch a drone coming up, or was walking through a school out west, and they had a special material that they were trying to develop because they were printing half of what looked to be a human heart, and they were showing how the internal valves and what have you that was working. So pretty interesting, pretty scary, but yet quite innovative. And it was that excitement part that you watched. So one of the things that we're doing at ASME to keep individuals exciting is different events. We call them E-Fests. When I first learned about this concept, it was pretty intriguing. E-Fests are around the world. So it's an engineering festival. It's typically a 3-day event where we gather several hundred engineering students. We're trying different ways to market that in terms of access to talent, and really I call it a focus group. So if I sit and I listen to several hundred young engineers across 3 or 4 or 5 different years of education, what do I need to learn from them, or what can I glean from them to figure out how do we produce and what products that we can produce, and where do we market to this younger group? I'm not sure they're going to pay for it, but that's the other part that we have to figure out. But how do we market to them and really give them the tools, give them the ability to keep them engaged and move on to it? So that was just in Vellore, India. We had 1,400 students that showed up. It's all coordinated by student volunteers. It's an event that goes on for 3 days. The exciting, the dancing, the young lady that was speaking is one of our senior volunteers, Callie Tarini, spent a long time with GE designing aircraft engines, and now she's promoting student excitement. So keeping that group engaged is something that I hope, if they did nothing else today, is it lets you think a little bit about how you can stay engaged the next couple of days and figure out how do we get some new younger individuals in this same area and keep doing what you're doing. Because I can tell you, I've spent a lifetime and built a small fortune in terms of knowledge of reading journals or reading publications. The ease and the access of having access to it is very comforting for me. So I want to thank you again for a few minutes to talk a little bit about our views of education, and I encourage you to and wish you a very happy conference. Thank you.